Welcome to the Life Matters podcast with enlightening conversations on success and living well. My guests are all motivated by the desire to make a difference, and they share their wisdom, personal journeys, and a host of practical guidance that we can apply in our lives. Subscribe on your favourite platform and never miss an episode. Today I'm joined by Phil Greenaway. Phil is a former professional rugby player, England under-18 international and director of sport at Dulwich College. Today he supports clients in sports and education, developing both facilities and people. There is a lot of wisdom in this conversation as we explore his journey, including fatherhood and becoming fully ourselves. Hello, Phil. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Diane. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be in your company. I know we've not known each other for that long, but it's great what conversations come from just being open to a conversation in a health club and saying hello. So I was delighted that we touched base that day.
Me too. And for some reason, I felt compelled to have you as a guest. So here we are. I'd like to start by talking about the influence that sports had in your life. I know you've played rugby at a very high level professionally, and it's been important throughout your life, and that you were a director of sport at Dulwich College for 12 years. Apart from sport being so important and being so central to your life, what shaped you most growing up, would you say?
Straight into the deep questions, Diane. No.
Don't do small talk, didn't I tell you?
I'm only joking. Yeah, look, sport's been really important to me from a young age. It was my mum and dad got divorced when I was very young, and it was a great way to have a relationship with my dad, who wasn't around. So that was certainly a way into rugby. But growing up in the southwest of England, I'm from Exeter originally, and we were always outdoors, out playing, doing something. In the days where you only had 4 TV channels to watch and mobile phones weren't around. So I had 2 older sisters, and we were always out, playing. We were always off down the park, with my friends from school, etc. So sports played an enormous part in my life, in my formative years in particular. And then I only sort of realised that I was any good at rugby in around the age of sort of 15 or 16, really, when things started happening with trials. And I think that's certainly that recognition and being part of something and being recognised for being good at something was something I was drawn towards. Probably, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back now and thinking just how important that was for me to sort of feel like I was excelling at something was really, really important. But then I think in the wider context, just sport in terms of being healthy, living an active lifestyle and what it brings to you as a person and an individual, being part of a team sport. I think certainly for a young male with hormones flying everywhere, being able to release some of that on a rugby pitch was a great thing. And I think particularly now for boys and for girls now, it was really important for me to be able to release that energy and have a way of managing my body physically, and getting physical aggression out and understanding what that looked like. So, but sporting more generally, your communication skills, regulating your emotions, and everything that comes with playing sport, I just think is been really, really important to me, and something I still do now. So I still stay active as I possibly can. I just know that I'm a better human being once I've done something physical, once I've been outside and exercised or been for a walk or whatever it might be. So I know I'm a better dad. I'm a better colleague. I'm better at nearly most things I do, because I just think exercising and giving that emotional regulation gives you some clarity of thought. It gives you time to think as well, often when you're outdoors and walking. So yeah, the sport's been really, really important to me from a young age, and then I guess in the wider sense, it's probably led me to be successful in my professional career, because if it hadn't have been for rugby, I don't know what I would have done. So I was very lucky at the age of 16 to be offered a scholarship, and the rugby turned professional in 1996. So it sort of suddenly became a career route for me as well. And I've been lucky enough to travel the world with rugby, been to some wonderful places and met some wonderful people along the way. And it's such a special game for me that I try and give back as much as I possibly can now. And only a couple of weeks ago, 12 of us went on a trip to skiing, and we played rugby together over 30 years ago. It's sort of given me those friends and those connections for life. Yeah, it's been certainly a central theme in my life in terms of being sport and rugby in particular. I think there's probably been a little bit of a danger at times when you became known as a rugby player rather than Phil, and rugby being something that I took part in rather than sort of my main identity. So I certainly suffered from that a little bit at university. And when you were a rugby scholar, you were a scholarship student for rugby. But overall, the experience has just been really, really positive and led me to still work in sport now. And it's something that I really enjoy doing, and being part of a community, being part of something that's bigger than yourself, and where often the collective of people leads towards chasing a goal that we wouldn't be able to achieve on our own. So that sort of sense of community and teamship and teamwork have all been really, really important, and part of the journey that I've really enjoyed, being part of something bigger than yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you played professionally. What age were you when you thought, I'm actually quite good at this? I could do this for a living for a while.
Yeah, yeah, probably the age of around 16 when I got selected for the England under-16 team, and then got offered a scholarship to a school in Bristol. And not that I was looking for a way out of Exeter, but it gave me an opportunity to expand my horizons. And my first trip away was on a first time ever on a plane, was to South Africa on a rugby tour, and those experiences gave me a sense of just how big the world is beyond my own four walls. And then, as I said, when I went to Bristol in '95, then rugby turned professional in '96. And my rugby teacher at school, a guy called Andy Robinson, he left the teaching profession to go professional as a rugby player. So I think then having great role models around like sort of made me think, well, actually, this is something I could do. But also, I definitely had a sense that it wasn't the only thing I wanted to do. I wanted to study. I wanted to um, ensure that I had a career beyond rugby, because rugby had only been professional for a year. No one quite knew how long it was all going to last. And so that was really important to me, just having a sense that there was life beyond rugby, because you're only ever one injury away from that being your end of your career, or occasionally a new coach comes in and they want to change the way things are done. So I was very aware of that from pretty early on, that it wasn't the only thing I wanted to do, but the opportunity to do it.
When you were professional, who did you play for?
So I was at Moseley Rugby Club in Birmingham for a year. I played at Bristol for a year. Both those clubs went bankrupt, so that certainly gave me the idea that it wasn't necessarily a career for life. And then I went back to Exeter University and played for Exeter Chiefs for 6 or 7 years, and had a great time there. And then transitioned out from professional rugby into sort of semi-professional rugby when I was about 27, 28. And again, running those two careers alongside each other and having a pathway was just really important to have that balance. I was a centre or a fullback, really preferred playing in the centres, but needs must, and that's what team sport is all about, isn't it? You do what's asked of you at times. So, but no, I loved it. I was very lucky to play in the same England under-18 side as the likes of Jonny Wilkinson and Mike Tindall and all those guys, and just loved it. Just made sure that I was making the most of all those experiences, and it was. It was really enjoyable. It was great fun.
Special time.
Yeah.
What were you studying then to make sure that you had a career after finishing rugby? What did you study at university?
I did a sports science degree at Exeter. And again, the university course we studied was great at opening up different avenues for you within that subject. So some people went down the coaching route, some people went down the psychology route, some people went down the biomechanics route. And that's where I think sport is such a great career for anybody, because if you love sport, it's a global operation. And if you want to be a lawyer and you love the law and you love sport, why not go and be a sports lawyer? If you love medicine, then you love sport, why not go and be a sports doctor? So I think there were certain things. I'd always kind of had one eye on teaching, because I thought you could travel the world with teaching. You can get a job anywhere across the globe as a teacher. So I did my master's in sport and exercise science, particularly around the sociology of sport and sporting subcultures and what that looked like. And then I also did my PGCE once I'd finished that. So I was at university for a long time.
Sounds like a great period of your life. A very enjoyable one. Then did you become a teacher for a while then? Were you I'm just thinking about how do you get to be the director of sport at somewhere so prestigious at Dulwich College? I'm just wondering what the pathway was.
Yeah, so I went and taught a place called Hartbury College in Gloucestershire, and we helped set up the rugby academy there whilst I was playing part-time at a rugby club called Cinderford Rugby Club, which was, one of the greatest clubs and club environments that I've ever been involved in, and I loved it there. Absolutely loved my time there. So I did some coaching and some teaching there, some lecturing alongside, and then in 2010 I left Gloucester Rugby Club where I was running the academy there, and went to London. And went to go and live in London, where I never thought I would be, and went down there just as a PE teacher. Took the opportunity to go as a PE teacher, and then within 2 years, I'd sort of just worked my way up, and was lucky enough to be given the director of sport role, and definitely suffered from some imposter syndrome in that role for a while. But again, I loved my time there, and I think what I really loved was the balance. It wasn't just rugby; it was badminton, it was water polo, it was providing opportunities for children across the board. It was doing stuff in the community for the local community. It was working with the old boys. It was working with a really eclectic mix of staff. Guys who were RS teachers taking rugby teams. We had guys who were history teachers taking football teams. And I really loved that you got to see the whole journey, because a lot of what I'd done up until that point was fairly elite sport, either playing myself or coaching. And I love the fact that you could make a difference with every single child, no matter what, their ability level was or what their perceived ability level was. You could inspire children to put a pair of trainers on and go for a run, or you could inspire children who couldn't swim. You could teach them to swim and give them a life skill, and just highlight that if you persevere with something and you're resilient and you keep going, you'll get close to where you want to be. So I love that. I absolutely loved that kind of environment where it was about every child and it was about the whole community.
Lots of life skills there, aren't there? And I imagine a lot of self-esteem building through sport and resilience, as you say,
Yeah,
that perhaps we don't get from other parts of the curriculum in our school life, and role models as well. I mean, teachers are terribly important role models, aren't they? Especially if we don't have strong role models at home for whatever reason.
yeah, I think so. I think sometimes because we can't necessarily quantify what it is that sport gives us, you can get a GCSE in PE and you can get an A-level in PE, but it's really tough to quantify the unquantifiables at times. How do you measure resilience? How do you measure leadership skills? How do you measure these things that we know that sport brings? And how do we justify? My budget at Dulwich College was 7 figures. How do we justify that budget and that we're making a difference to every child when we might need another maths teacher or something like that? So, and I remember teaching a lad who was from not an affluent background, and that's again what I loved about Dulwich. At the time, there were over a third of the pupils there were on a bursary of some form or another. So yes, this prestigious educational establishment where people were paying a lot of money for their children to be educated, but they sat alongside people from very different backgrounds, and that's why I really enjoyed my time there. And one lad, he was living in a 2-bedroom flat with 3 brothers and sisters, and before he got to school every day, he had to get his brothers and sisters to school. He was 12 years old, and his mum wasn't very well. She was unfortunately dying with cancer, and it was a one-on-one in the swimming pool with him one day, and I said, look, we've got 6 weeks together. What is it you want to achieve in the next 6 weeks? And he said, I want to be able to do a length of each stroke, and I want to be able to pick a brick up off the bottom of the pool. And we managed to get him to those goals in that short time. And I just remember the smile on his face when he came up from the bottom of the pool holding that back brick that we all used to do, as part of our life-saving skills. And the tears on his face brought, huge emotion to me. I feel myself being emotional about it now. And I think, we're in a really privileged position as teachers. And as much as we can inspire, if we don't get it right, we can go the other way, and we can rob the people in our care the opportunity to enjoy something and put them off sport for life as much as we can inspire them. So we've got to be really, really careful, and we've got to understand that, just how powerful a position you're in as a role model, as a teacher, as a coach. And it's something when I do some, coaching with coaches and people now, is just to remind them of, who were your role models at school and why were they so important to you? Who were the people that inspired you and what was it about them? Because we've just got to be careful that we don't tip the balance the other way as well. And, sport can be great fun. It can be enormously rewarding. It can be heartbreaking at times as well, because only one team can win the championship. Only one team can win the nationals. What are the other lessons that we learn along the way? What are the other things that we can take from that time? How do we justify that within our curriculum? I think it's so important that we keep fighting the good fight for sport and for physical education, because of the positive effects it has on the brain when it comes to being able to perform academically, when it comes to living a long, healthy, happy life, the friendships you make, the people you meet along the way. And so, yeah, I do wax lyrical about sports. So I apologise if I'm going on and on.
I absolutely agree with everything that you're saying, whether it be sport or just a form of exercise that you enjoy. And interesting to hear that you say about it being stressful, because I actually had a theory about why women live longer than men, and it's because we don't follow a football team generally. Because whenever I've watched any European, England's playing or something, and I follow something European or the World Cup, it's just so stressful. I mean, if they're a goal up, you want it to be over. If it's a goal down, it can't go on long enough. And I just can't handle the stress. My theory was that women live longer because we don't put ourselves through that on a weekly basis by following a team. And I'm sure there's absolutely no grounds in it whatsoever, but it sounded like a theory to me. And absolutely, I agree with you about all the benefits of sport and being part of a team, part of something, and exercise and all the impacts it has on the brain and the body. Which brings me in quite nicely to talk about male mental health, which has become um, quite a topic. The government launched its first 10-year strategy at the end of last year, didn't it, around men's health. And male mental health was quite a large part of that. What's your view on male mental health, and particularly in teenage boys, perhaps, having worked with age group?
Yeah, so I'm not saying that males have got an easier or a tougher time than females. I grew up in a household with two older sisters and my mum, so I don't in any way want this to come across as a sort of lack of empathy towards the female journey either. But I do think that for some reason males struggle to talk and to open up. I think often within a male sporting club or sporting environment, if the culture is not a healthy one, then that can lead to having to play the part and be somebody maybe that you wouldn't normally want to be, or get involved in things that you wouldn't normally want to get involved in, or there's the potential for being ostracized for having a certain view on certain things. But in general, I think men really struggle to open up. I think there's a breakdown of the family structure in the UK and worldwide, particularly. I think the pressures that come on a man, less so, well, maybe not less so, but certainly in terms of traditionally always been the major earner in a family, or those types of things. And thank God that's changing. And I just think that men in general are not very good at opening up. And I certainly don't think that we've always had this stoicism in the UK about not talking about our emotions and kind of getting through, and it'll all be fine, and not all talking and opening up. And often that can lead to some pretty serious consequences. And I think the stats tell us that. The stats tell us that male suicide rates are as high as they've ever been in young men. And I think the journey for men in terms of how you need to act, how you should behave, is not a simple one. It's a complicated one.
Yeah.
And everybody goes through it at different rates. If you're a 16-year-old and you're born in July and August, you're sharing a year with boys who are often 11, 10 months older than you. And I think that's can be tough at times, the developmental stages of that journey. But in general, I think for me, it's more about what have we got to do to try and solve it. I think we've got to make it easier for men to talk. I think we've got to make it more accessible for men. I know that we both know the charity in Bromley really well, and I think it's something like 75% of the people who see a counsellor on a regular basis are women. So is it something that men are open to? Is it something they really understand the benefits of?
Mm.
I certainly also think that, I don't have the stats here, but most of the therapists and counsellors out there tend to be females. So do men feel happy talking to females? I can certainly say that from personal experience, I found it a lot easier talking to a man rather than a woman at times. Through that counselling journey, which I went on through some marriage counselling that we went through, and then some grief counselling I went through for a friend who committed suicide. So I think there's, everyone's aware that it's out there, and it's not easy, but it's not easy for anyone. So what can we do at a younger age to talk about our emotions and our feelings that can allow children, boys and girls, to be able to understand their emotions from a younger age and find them some fairly simple common language, because often the words that we use around emotions are big words. And if we can make that simpler, if we can give people a better understanding of, I use red to blue. I use a gazing red to blue with my children quite often, and that gives us a simple.
I don't know anything about that. Can you talk to me about that? What does that involve?
Yeah, it's just really simple. I mean, I think most of the conversations that we have, and I break everything down to everything's a performance conversation for me. How am I performing as a father? How am I performing at work? How am I performing in my sport? So the majority of things I think that we struggle with are when we're not performing to where we want to be performing. So, and if you're talking about performing conversations, that there tends to be a amount of pressure there. So how do we deal with pressure? And Gazing have developed a brilliant, just a very simple mind map that's a red to blue mind map. And we know it's a bit more complicated that in the real world, but this just gives people a really easy language to say, look, I'm in my red head today, or in this moment in time. So we talk about recognizing where you are. We talk about accepting where you are, because we're all human beings. Our emotions are not controlled by us at times, but
So is red hot, angry, fired up? Is that what red is?
a little bit, but it's also unfocused. It's confused. It's maybe talking about the past and the future rather than kind of understanding and being in the moment that you're in now, where we tend to be, if we're in the blue head, we talk about being focused, about being controlled, about being able to see the big picture and just having real clarity in our thoughts. Whereas when we're in the red head, we tend to be confused. We tend to be questioning ourselves. We tend to have self-doubt in that stage. So I talked with my children about red to blue, and they've got a simple little bracelet, a little one of those things that go around their arm, and they're red to blue. So it's a reminder to them every day that they're allowed to be in the red. You're allowed to feel that way. It's not a problem. But can you recognise what are the things that get you in the red? Is it lack of preparation? Is it not knowing your calendar? Is it, what are the things that stress you out, that put you in the red, put you under pressure? That mean then you're not performing under pressure. And then we talk about the blue, being in a blue head of, well, what have you done well? Well, I slept well. I got my exercise in. I know I'm better at managing difficult meetings if I've exercised, or if I've walked and talked, or if I've done my prep properly. So we talk about that in terms of managing the pressure and managing the stress, because pressure is a good thing, right? Because pressure drives performance in lots of ways, and if we weren't under
Yeah.
pressure,
Well, what do they say? One man's stress is another man's motivation.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are times when I've been under huge pressure, particularly in the role at Dulwich, and I've actually thought, well, I'm really privileged to be in this position. So let's deal with that bit first. Let's just accept this is a good pressure, because you're in a good job and you're in a lucky position to be here. I've not always got it right, by the way. I've not always, but you learn from those experiences. And I think if you've got a framework that you can talk to your children about, or you can talk to your friends about, it just allows people an easy way to open up a performance conversation. If you call it a performance conversation rather than a mental health conversation, then does that make things easier? I try not to talk about mental health. I try and talk about emotional health, just because I think the connotations with mental health, I think everybody assumes that mental health is this clinical thing, but it's not. It's just how we live our lives every day. And so for me, terminalizing that as emotional health, and everybody's got a problem. Every human being's got something they worry about. Whether you've got £10 million in the bank, or you've got £10 in the bank, you've got something that potentially will keep you up at night. And that's us as human beings. That goes back to, when we were in the Stone Ages, but we're not worried about saber-toothed tigers now. We're not worried about necessarily where we're getting our dinner. So as human beings, we're wired to put problems in our way. And when we come under pressure, our common sense tends to go out the window. And actually, common sense is not that common when you're under pressure. And if we can do that a bit more.
Well, our brain actually responds differently, doesn't it? when we're under pressure. We're not as resourceful. The prefrontal cortex isn't as able to be as resourceful. I love this red blue idea, and I'm sort of a bit annoyed that haven't known about it. How young were your children when you started being able to use this with them? I'm curious.
So Maggie was about 12, and Alfie
Right.
was about 10, and we just started having those conversations.
Where does this come from? Well,
It comes from a company called Gaze Unlimited, and there was a book written, and it, traditionally they worked with the All Blacks rugby team on red to blue strategies. They now work with the army. They work with some big organisations just to help people manage stress. And it's funny because now me and my children are now at the point where we don't talk about red to blue because we've gone past that in many ways, because we're now into and they're really used to and open to having conversations about how they feel and the stresses that we maybe as adults don't hear. Sometimes we might listen, but we don't really hear. And they're probably the same stresses and strains that we had about fitting into a group or about homework or whatever it might be. So we have those types of conversations now in a bit more detail rather than just using the red to blue. But that was definitely the framework that allowed them to access those conversations with their parents.
I think that's fantastic. And also, I love what you're saying about we all do have problems and stresses, and we absolutely do. And if we don't, we're not alive. We're not here. What I have done with stress is I've started to use it as an opportunity to raise my awareness about myself, because when life is going very nicely, you don't learn a lot about yourself, do you? I think you learn a huge amount about yourself when you're facing adversity, in terms of all the things that come up, the way you respond, the sorts of things that you want to say, and the behavior, what your inclination is to respond. So I actually have started trying to welcome problems and stress in my life, because I think, oh gosh, this is where I do all my growing. This is where I do all my learning.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. We talk again, in that performance stage, is performing under pressure, performing under stress. When you finding things stressful, is learning how to perform and walk towards those things, rather than run away with the natural sort of fight or flight that we've got as human beings. But the more of those we can walk towards, the more lessons we can learn, the better we end up dealing with stress in the long run. And whilst not every stress is the same, the feeling is the same.
Yeah,
So if we can
yeah,
recognize that feeling and then think about, well, how did I handle this last time? And I think the majority of times, for me, stress makes you forget the things that you know. And as I said, if we go back to approaching things with common sense and the things that we know and the things that keep us grounded and the things that keep us on the straight and narrow, then actually managing stress and managing those difficult situations is not always easy because there's emotions involved and that can be tough sometimes. There can be some tough things happening, whether that be through grief or through marital breakups or, I don't know, business closing down, whatever it might be, is knowing the sun's going to shine tomorrow. It's a new day. Be really grateful for all the things that you have got in your life. Be grateful for your health. Be grateful for, your friends, your family and all those things. And once you can kind of ground yourself into those things again, I think you're open to learning the lessons. But nobody's open to learning a lesson whilst they're in what I would say is the redhead. You kind of have to be fairly clear and have a clarity. And that's what you say you've done, is that you take that stressful situation on board, accept that it's there, and then go, okay, well, how do I learn? How do I grow? How do I get better here?
if you can get a bit of detachment, if you can stand back from it somehow, just even a little bit of space is helpful. And one of my favorite sayings is, "This too will pass," which I
Absolutely.
find myself saying quite frequently. It's the
Another part of the red to blue is that, when we're in the blue, we've got the ability to zoom in and zoom out. We've got the ability to zoom in and see where the micro problem is, but also then be able to zoom out and see, the big picture. So I think, definitely finding context is really, really helpful. Finding context in your life is really, really helpful. Finding context in the situation. How big a problem is this really? It might have really annoyed me for the moment, but in the grand scheme of things. And I think also, we all need to to understand. I've probably only got better at this in the last 2 or 3 years, but understanding that we're all hypocrites. Every single one of us is a hypocrite in some way, shape, or form. And I'll give you an example, which my daughter sprung on me, was somebody zoomed down the road. I was walking the dog. They were clearly late to dropping their kid off at school or wherever it was. And I turned around and said, "Oh my God, look at that idiot," like that, to my daughter. And about 3 days later, we were late to going to her orthodontist appointment. And I was the idiot screaming down the road at 100 miles an hour because it suited me at that time. So just understanding and having empathy for other people's situation as to why they might be behaving that way sometimes is, I think that's really, really important. But also accepting we don't always get it right. And I think, holding your hands up and just going, "Look, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. I apologize."
Completely agree. And people behind a wheel, me included, some of my not most proud moments, I have to say, and not ones that I'm going to share on here. When you came to leave being director of sport and you moved into consultancy, is that right? I'm interested to know what that transition was like. Was it hard? Was it scary? Did you feel that there was a loss of identity for you in having had such a important role at this establishment for a long period of time? And yeah, so walk me through what was your thinking and why did you change?
I'd always wanted to do something for myself. I'd always wanted to give someone a crack. I never quite knew what that was going to look like. I still don't now, to be honest. At times you're not entirely sure what's coming around the corner. But listen, I had a wonderful time at Dulwich, but I'd done the job for long enough. And I think in and around that time, a lot changed in the teaching world, a lot changed in the organisation. And whilst I loved it and I learned so much, you wear so many hats in that role, something had shifted in the organisation and maybe something had shifted in me in terms of how we dealt with human beings and how we dealt with people on a one-to-one level. And I didn't want to be part of that anymore. I didn't want to be part of for want of a better phrase, what I felt was a clique at the top. And you're either in or you're out, and I wasn't prepared to put my morals on hold to sustain a job. So whilst I loved it and I really enjoyed it, I could feel that shift coming, and I decided that I didn't want to go up in the organisation and become a deputy head or an assistant head. I didn't want to go and start again at another school. And so the opportunities to travel with teaching were still there. I thought long and hard about that, but teaching had certainly changed and become a very, very, very stressful place to be. The expectation from parents, all that comes with it. And as I said, for a long time, I enjoyed that and I was fine with it, but 12 years is a long time to do that. I felt also that the school needed somebody else to take it on. For want of a better phrase, I'd taken the shirt and left it in a better place, I felt, but it was certainly time for somebody else to take up the mantle and either build on what we'd done or to change it or to whatever it is that I wanted to do. So I didn't really know what I was going to do, but luckily enough, I'd been at the school for a long enough time that they granted me a sabbatical, and that gave me a bit of time and a bit of freedom to explore what that might look like. And then I think with the connections I'd made over my time, and the people that I reached out to and lent on for some advice, it just sort of opened up into this world of consultancy particularly within schools and education, which I really care about. But I was certainly at the point where I wanted to choose who I worked alongside. And if there were projects out there that really grabbed my attention, then I wanted to go after those. And if there were projects out there that weren't necessarily for me but earned money, I didn't really want to go after those. So I certainly got a sort of a sense early on that really wanted to add value. I didn't want to go and work somewhere just for the money or just pick up a consultancy because that was paying the bills. I really wanted to go and add value to places. So I kind of had to realize what my value was, and that took a bit of time. What was my skill set? What could I add? So I spent a lot of time sort of researching, and I was lucky enough to pick up 2 consultancies very early on, and they were through, connections I'd made in the teaching and the rugby world. And they sort of set me on my path. So I'll be forever grateful for those 2 organisations for picking me up early on and placing me in that direction. And then it was about being open to every conversation that was out there. So whilst I might not have ended up working with somebody, just being open to every single conversation that was coming my way was really important, because the world was changing. The world, of AI was changing things. The way that sport and education was moving, the VAT on school fees, everything that happened with us all being online. We're online now having this conversation. That's one of the great things that happened through COVID. You can have those conversations, but I'm a people's person. I like being with people. So I did miss the team element a little bit to start with, but you realize very quickly that those people will always be there. They'll always want to have a conversation, and they're really excited for you. But similar to what you said earlier on, if there was going to be any growth in me as a human being, I had to sort of make the leap. Otherwise, I would have still been in that common room in 25 years' time, drinking coffee at 11 every day, because that's what we'd always done. And it was my daughter actually who kind of gave me the freedom to go and do it. She sort of challenged me, and um, she
Really?
she was moving to a new school, and she was the only child going to her new school from her current school. So, I sort of said to her, "Look, Mags, you got to be brave, and you've got to go for it. And you're a bright, lovely young child, and you'll make friends. And I know it's scary." And da-da. And she turned around to me and said, "Well, Daddy, are you brave?" And I thought, well, this was right around the time when those decisions were hanging over my head, and I just thought, well, I've got to go and give it a crack and be brave. And I'm forever grateful for, as I said, for the kids, and for, my ex-wife Carly, and backing me, and the school really, and my family. Everyone I spoke to about my family, we're all just, look, you got to go and give it a crack. And I think because you've got a teaching degree behind you, it is a risk, but you do have a safety blanket there. I probably could have picked up some physical education work and some coaching if I'd have been really desperate and needed it. So maybe it wasn't as brave a leap as Maggie thought, but it still felt pretty brave at the time.
I want to talk to you, if I may, because you introduced your daughter and her words of wisdom out of the mouths of babes. They're amazing, aren't they?
Yeah.
How has being a father to both a son and a daughter shaped you? What have been the great lessons in life for you being a dad?
I think, and I remember this, Maggie was taken into Carly was taken into King's Hospital. And we had this whole water birth planned and everything like that. It was all going to be great. And very quickly, Carly was whipped out of the water birth. A bit of problem, and there was an issue, and we very nearly lost Maggie. Luckily everything was fine. It was all okay. But Maggie and Carly had to stay in hospital that night. And I remember walking back. I did stop in the pub, and I had a pint of cider. I was just delighted that Maggie was okay. And I walked back to Dulwich College that night, and I sat down with a couple of guys, and there was a big dinner going on at the school, and I was dressed in a t-shirt and cargo pants and a pair of flip-flops, and everyone else was in black tie. Um, I remember everybody talking to me, and all I could see was little faces around their heads of my daughter, and I just sort of suddenly thought, well, this is what life is. Life makes sense now. We're here to recreate, the generation. We're here to give back to the world, and my job now is to give back to these two and be the best that I possibly can along the way. And again, not always got that right, but certainly well intentioned.
Mm.
It also raised some things for me from my childhood, which I've struggled to sort of come to terms with a little bit, in terms of my dad leaving home, or certain things that happened to us as kids, but it's also allowed me to put that into context and understand my relationship with my father a lot more. But I think being a parent and being a dad is, possibly just one of the most fulfilling things you can ever do. It's really powerful. And I love my kids, more than anything. Like most of us out there, you'd walk over hot coals for them. You'd do absolutely anything for them. And I think, the challenge for me now is to work out how quickly do you let them off the leash to make their own mistakes? How do you allow them the space and the time to grow as individuals? But I've certainly become a lot more forgiving, as a father. There's probably, when I was younger, it was all about winning. It was all about doing this, that, and the other, and it was very driven. Whereas now, as I said, that word of context and understanding, I think, is certainly something that I feel like I understand life a bit more now. Now that I've been lucky enough to have those two.
I think I completely agree with what you're saying about being a parent, because if anybody asks me what my best work is, I always say my daughter, and I absolutely mean it. I also think that being a parent teaches you about how nuanced life is, that it's not black and white. It's not this or that. And you learn so much about yourself again as a parent, about yourself as a human being. So that's lovely to hear. You sound a very devoted dad. And you're still heavily into your fitness, and I believe you're training for the London Marathon. Is that right?
Yeah, whether that's the midlife crisis or, I'm not sure. But yeah, I've always been keen to do the marathon and stay healthy. And then when the rugby sort of finished, and trying to find other things to do to give you that sort of sense of purpose, and also to be a good role model to the children.
Mm,
So during COVID, we did the marathon, but we did the virtual marathon. So I'd always been keen to go back and do it again.
right.
But I have to say the training has not gone as well this time around as what it did back in 2020. So I've been struggling a bit with an Achilles injury, but I'm running for the Wooden Spoon, which is a rugby charity, which they do some great work with youngsters and with children to give them the same opportunities that I had, which some children might not get otherwise, because rugby's such a wonderful sport. And as I said, I feel so blessed to have had such a great time in it, and the opportunity to do that and give back. Well, that will probably be what drives me, hopefully, around the 26.2 miles in 2 weeks on Sunday. So in the 26. And I'm hoping we don't have weather like this. I'm hoping it's a bit cooler than it is today. But yeah, no, so yeah, fingers crossed. And, it's an incredible event that runs, and all those people running for all those wonderful causes out there. And again, I think you see London at its finest.
Absolutely. Have you got an idea about the time you'd like to run it in?
I did have, but as I've not run anything for about 4.5 weeks, I'm hoping to get round. So
You'll be happy to get round.
I'll be happy to get round. Yeah, this time around, I'll be happy to get round. And I'm seeing an old friend tomorrow for a physio session on my Achilles. So hopefully Dave will work his magic, and I'll be able to make the starting line. But I'll make the starting line regardless, whether I walk, run, or crawl. I'll get round.
Well, I wish you good luck with that. I'm sure you'll finish and raise some really important funds for that amazing charity. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been so interesting, very inspiring. And even though I don't understand a lot about rugby, if people want to find out more about you and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that, please?
LinkedIn is always a good way, just to grab me on LinkedIn, or I do have my own website. So just type in Phil Greenaway Consultancy Limited, and always happy to have a conversation regardless of what it's about. And as I said, if I can't necessarily help directly, then I'm sure I can hopefully be able to plug somebody in. And that's what I really enjoy about the work I do now, is it's not necessarily all me. Sometimes you have a conversation and you just think, oh, those two guys would be great together, so let's link those two guys up, or that person, yeah, they're going to add
A
value to you.
connector.
So I enjoy that. But no, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phil. Lovely to talk to you. Hope
And you, Diane, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.